People often set up a healthcare plan, and we've used the term healthcare plan, and I think we might all have very different meanings to what that is. But from my point of view, typically it's some sort of mix of private medical insurance, health cash plans, which Health Shield are one of the providers of, employee assistance programs, and then all these peripheral things we've talked about as sort of some do, some don't. But often people do that without setting any objectives, without measuring this properly. And obviously it's really difficult for you to convince your board of directors or whoever you might need to convince if you don't have evidence.
I think I've found over the years that it's the question most companies don't really ask themselves is, why do we want healthcare? Healthcare tends to be put in because we've got to do it, but they don't always think of what they want from it. I know you said you've got a reasonably small company, 100 people, very, very good PMI package in place, covers everybody. But there are, if you sort of start looking at suppliers or brokers, there are all sorts of other products out there that can either key in with that, and it's just the awareness that those products are there, what they can do for the staff. And you can start, you've all mentioned health and well-being going round. Well, that's a very wide brush to start talking about. And it's what will health and well-being do for you as a company? How does it affect the bottom line? And I think a lot of these are the questions that doesn't get asked, and that's why it's difficult going back to sort of finance and say we want some money for this, because there's not really been any work done to say if you do this it will save or it will have this impact on the bottom line. So that's where I've seen it over the years, where the difficulty is.
Yes, the workplace landscape has never been more difficult for you. And the sort of conversations that we're having with organisations is we have less staff, more pressure, 24/7 society, employees are struggling. So luckily it is now becoming a boardroom issue, and health and wellbeing has reached the agenda of the board. And I think you're absolutely right, Peter. I think it's about metrics and it's about measurement. And I think you have so much data available to you. So from my point of view, it's starting with your strategy and what data is telling you, and then looking at that data and being able to have a picture. And one of the things that we're hearing more and more is organisations want resilient employees. Well, resilience comes from people who are healthy, who are looking after their health and wellbeing. They're sleeping well, they're eating well, they're well hydrated, the sort of corporate athlete, if you like. So never has there been a time, I think, for health and wellbeing and mental health, which we've already mentioned this morning, to be on the agenda. And I think the time is now to seize that opportunity, because actually board directors are listening.
Do you think it's possibly harder for smaller companies? Because and when I say smaller, I mean, let's say up to 250 or even up to 100 in your case, employees, because often, obviously we have to convince the board, we have to convince the finance director. In small companies, especially under 100, you might have a person that is the PA, they're writing tenders, they're doing all sorts of juggling, but they also have an HR responsibility, and they have to convince their board that there's a problem. And often the reason they can't convince the board that there's a problem is because they're not given the training that you talked about for their line managers to sort of report up, and they don't have those tools that some larger organisations have. But also, just to come back to your point about the data about Pru Health, that sort of information is key. And I think that we don't realise, well, I realise, but perhaps the HR community don't realise that insurers can give you such interesting data. And you can get that data broken down to, musculoskeletal claims, psychological claims, oncology, and then you can use that as a starting point to plan how you go forward, because actually claims from certain sectors are going to be perhaps more on the psychological side, and others perhaps manufacturing more on the musculoskeletal. So we need that information to guide us as to how we plan our wellbeing strategy.